So doing a review, I feel like I'm going to go through it quickly. Plus, I'm recording this. But let me say one more thing about the essay. Of course, it's due Monday, and that's the day we'll do the objective part of the test. You want to make sure you get your Scantrons, but you need to review what plagiarism is, and I'm not looking for some kind of a gotcha moment. I'm not looking to catch you on some little technicality. You quoted somebody twice in the same paragraph and you only had one reference or something like that. And for the test essays, a lot of things are assumed that you're discussing things from the presentation in your book. But you want to do your own work, especially if you look at some other outside source. You want to list it. But basically, at the University of Virginia, plagiarism, if another student accuses a student of an honor offense, there was a trial. And plagiarism was one of the honor offenses that somebody could be accused of. And if they were convicted, the single penalty that the university honor system provided was banishment from the university for life. That's how plagiarism was viewed at the University of Virginia, an institution that had an honor code that meant something. And that'll give you an idea of how I feel about it. I feel that if you plagiarize once, you should fail the course. But we don't. So you will get a 0, though. If you hand in an essay or a term paper that is substantially copied, and I'm purposely leaving that vague, but substantially copied from another source without attribution, remember, the understanding is that if you don't attribute something to someone else, the understanding in your writing is that this is your work. These are your words. So you're basically, passing something off as something that's not yours. And that's the kind of thing that'll get you a 0 on an essay, and there's no opportunity to rewrite a plagiarized essay in my class, because sometimes people take that into account in their cost-benefit analysis, their risk-reward analysis, So, you can try it, but it usually takes me less than 2 or 3 minutes to find where a plagiarized essay is plagiarized from. So if you want to do it and take the risk, fine, but you've been warned. This has gotten to be much worse, not only here, but even at CCBC. I had a plagiarized essay in my Saturday morning class, and they'll find out the bad news this Saturday morning. It used to be I would get 1 or 2 of these a semester. Now I got to be looking out for one on every test, 1 or 2. But at any rate, okay. So I'm going to pass around a roll. I don't want to start out on a negative, but, I do want to make that clear. So, the first part of your review sheet talks about the allegory of the cave, and look, I mean, obviously the prison, see, if you do one of the essays, as I said, on the allegory of the cave, you want to relate some of the actual situation of the prisoners themselves. You know, they're there, they're chained, they chain in their heads and necks. They can only see the back wall of the cave, and they've been there pretty much all their lives. And of course, Plato's trying to emphasize that because the only thing they ever see are the shadows, those shadows for them become reality. And we said that the prisoners are supposed to be like us, not in the literal sense that we've been caving or that we've been prisoners in a cave. But note, if we're going to look at the critical function of philosophy, the fact is these prisoners are growing up in a certain cultural environment, and they're forming beliefs about their immediate experiences, right? And we find that their experiences are related to the shadows, and so they form what turn out to be false beliefs about the shadows. They think they are the most real things. So in illustrating the critical function of philosophy, then, you know, this environment inside the cave where the prisoners grow up is essentially equivalent to our own environment. In other words, like the prisoners, we have grown up in a particular cultural environment from all sorts of sources. Like the prisoners, we have formed sets of beliefs about what is true that we have essentially soaked up from our environment. And of course these beliefs come from a myriad of sources, right? They come from our family upbringing and their values. They come from our early school training. They come from things we've read, whether it be textbooks or novels. They come from electronic sources like the internet, social media, and also from films, television we may have watched. In other words, there are a lot of things within our culture that form our beliefs, but just because we are exposed to them and they give us a certain, you know, certain beliefs about the world, it doesn't mean that they're all correct. And so, you know, the prisoners' chains illustrate the fact that we're all kind of bound by the culture we grew up in. So the shadows are what their unreflected beliefs are about. When we say unreflected, we mean beliefs that they've just soaked up, came to believe are true, don't question, always believe this. Now, of course, for Plato, the items casting the shadows would be like the sources of our beliefs in the center interpretation here. Remember, this handout is on Blackboard, and if somebody has not yet gotten familiar with Blackboard, you know, you really need to take advantage of you know, the training IT provides, or get one of your classmates to take you through that. Yeah. Yes, it's in the handouts subfolder. It's in so okay, if I backed up, right, in course documents, there's a subfolder called handouts, and that's where this is located. It says Allegory of the Cave meetings. So that's where it is. Okay. So, again, the released prisoner represents the philosophy student, and in this center interpretation, it illustrates the fact that there's a critical side to philosophy, that among other things, philosophy asks us to think about the beliefs that we've soaked up from our culture. Think about why we hold them. Think about the reasons we have for thinking they're true. In other words, to sift through and evaluate them. And please put away your phones. I shouldn't have to tell adults more than once to do that. You all know by now that I don't want them out when we're having class. Like I said, go on Indeed, go on Monster, go on any of the job sites, Craigslist. See how many good, well-paying jobs there are for texters listed. Or people who are really savvy about what is it, Facebook or whatever it is. All right. So the prisoners who are back in the cave represent the other people in our culture who are not particularly interested in reflecting about their beliefs. Just soak up what they're told, uncritically accept what they're told, and don't question anything. So we saw that the journey of the released prisoner represents the journey philosophy can take us on in having us challenge our unreflected beliefs. And this is illustrated in your textbook on page, I think, 11 and 12, where your author talks about the critical function, and then he gives a concrete illustration of someone who, from their own cultural background, has certain religious beliefs, and these are challenged when they come to college, and so they're forced to confront the reasons why they hold the beliefs that they do. But it doesn't just amount to religious beliefs. It can be political beliefs, beliefs about what's real, all kinds of things. Okay, so basically with this interpretation, what's outside the cave are the beliefs that survive philosophical reflection. In other words, beliefs. See, there's a sense in which a belief can become your own belief when you examine it, you think about it yourself, and you say, well, okay, this is what I've been told, but when I look at this independently, should I accept this? Should I reject this? And as I said, this analogy breaks down when we're talking about the real world, because some beliefs are going to withstand critical scrutiny, and some aren't. In the story, in Plato's story, all of the beliefs that the prisoners have about the shadows turned out to be wrong, and really should be rejected. But in the real world, when you're confronted to examine your beliefs, you may find in philosophical argumentation, and as I said, one reason why we're using a textbook, we're looking at how people who have thought through some of the same questions that concern all of us, can I know anything for sure? Do I have free will? What's real? Is God provable? Does the existence of evil mean that God isn't there? All these, do I have a soul, or am I just a material being subject to looking at how these people have approached these, you know, not just as a history of ideas thing, not just to memorize what they held, although, you know, that is the kind of thing that we ask on objective questions, because there has to be a right and a wrong. But we're trying to have them prompt us to think critically and philosophically about our own worldview, our own beliefs, things that we have soaked up and accepted as true. I passed around a roll earlier. If you didn't get it, you can go and track it down at the end. Okay, so basically what's outside is knowledge. Now, we also looked at how the allegory of the cave relates to Plato's theory of forms. And so since we have gone over the theory of forms, you know, just real quickly, you need to realize that Plato has two worlds. This world for him is the world of becoming. It's the world where things are less than fully real. Now that's an odd view to us. Remember, for us, whether something exists is an all or nothing matter. There aren't degrees of existing. There aren't degrees of being real like there were for Plato. But for Plato, things in this world are real, but less real than things in the world of the forms. And images of things in this world are less real than the things they're images of. And so, in Plato's two worlds view, everything in this world, the world of change, Heraclitus' world, is illustrated by what goes on inside the cave. And so now I'm on the far right part of that handout. You know, again, I didn't print this out, and I'm trying to limit the amount of printing I did do, but it is there for you on Blackboard. So the prisoners, again, are us, and here I say the chains represent the fact that we are material beings in the material world, whether we like it or not. We're in this world. And remember, things in this world are less real than things in the world of the forms for Plato. But like the prisoners who are only acquainted with the shadows, we think things in this world are the most real things. We think things like this, that our senses put us in touch with, are the most real, whereas Plato's trying to convince us that there's a world of changeless, eternal standards that's even more real than anything particular in this world. So again, the images of things that are carried by the people and are the shadows, they represent any kind of an image of something in this world. Not just shadows, they're one type of image, but a reflection in a mirror and water is another type of image. A created image, if somebody painted a desk, for Plato, that image is less real than the desk itself. And so the items carried by the people that cast the shadows then represent material things in this world. And what gives light and heat to this world? Well, we said if everything inside the cave represents this world, the thing giving light and heat inside the cave is the fire. So the fire in the cave represents the sun in this world. Of course, the released prisoner, in both these ways of interpreting Plato's story, and he did mean it to be interpreted both ways. He meant it to be a story about how Socrates challenged the Athenians to examine their culturally acquired beliefs, but he also meant it to be a story about his own views on reality. And so the released prisoner then represents somebody who's confronted by philosophy to examine their views. The philosophy student, the guide of the released prisoner, is either the philosophy teacher, or for Plato it's specifically Socrates. And there's a sideways reference to this when the released prisoner comes back into the cave, and the prisoners in the cave don't want to go on a philosophical journey. They want to stay happily ignorant where they are. And they threaten to kill somebody who takes them on such a journey. Well, Plato is writing this after the trial and death of Socrates. So he meant readers in Athens to make the connection. So again, the philosophical journey is a journey for Plato toward genuine knowledge. He does think that we can know some things for certain. We have this story that we may not want to buy into ourselves, that knowledge is really recollection of things we knew. Plato's view and Socrates' view is that our souls were once in this intelligible world, in this other world, and we once had direct knowledge of the forms. But we forget some of that when a soul becomes reincarnated into another body. A lot of this knowledge is knocked into a latent state, and so that's why we need questioning. That's why we need the Socratic method to try to bring out what is deep knowledge, and that's what's happening with Meno's slave boy, supposedly. So the world outside the cave, everything outside the cave, in this far right column interpretation, Plato's series of forms represents everything outside, represents the world of the forms, which for Plato is a world of true knowledge. So for Plato, what we call knowledge is not always what he would call knowledge. In other words, if I say, look, I know there's a telephone sitting on this desk, that is a knowledge of something that my senses gives me. For Plato, knowledge of particular facts is not knowledge. So he's not claiming we come into this world, I like to illustrate it with the old poem in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, which is a particular fact that either happened or didn't happen, but Plato is not saying that we come into this world knowing particular facts like that. What he's talking about as knowledge are things like the unchanging truths of geometry or arithmetic or of mathematics. Things like knowledge of good and evil, knowledge of moral principles, what goodness is, what justice is, what holiness is, and he thinks that these things don't change, and these are what he talks about are the forms. And so, and this is the way you get real knowledge of a form, is to be able to define the form. In other words, if You know, if I say that a triangle is a plane geometric figure with 3 sides and 3 angles that add up to 180 degrees, for Plato, my ability to define a triangle means I have real knowledge of what one is. And this is what they're trying to get at in some of these other dialogues, where they try to say, well, can we get a better definition of things like justice and a just law, things like moral goodness? You know, so anyway, and the bottom line here solves what might be a question in some people's minds if you didn't catch this the first time. You can say, well, wait a second, if the fire inside the cave represents the sun in this world, what does the sun represent in the outside world in the story of the cave? And for Plato, the sun represents what he calls the form of the good, Plato's ultimate standard for moral goodness. We don't go into it much, but he had a hierarchy of forms, and that was the chief form. So I just went through this part of the review sheet in a lot more detail. Now, again, I don't expect you, when you write an essay, to be able to summarize an argument in this very professional way. It takes a lot of training, and frankly, it takes more logic than we teach you in a basic logic course to be able to do something like this, you know. But sometimes it's nice to get out an argument so you can see how is Socrates responding to the reasoning of Crito and his other followers that he ought to accept their offer of escape because it's not going to cost so much money to bribe the jailers. He's not going to cause his friends harm. They don't think they're going to have the state come against them. His friends are worried how public opinion is going to treat them, both then and historically, if they don't at least try to get Socrates out. And you know, and so we went over some of this when I went over the question. They also mentioned that Socrates is a family man. He's got a wife, he's got 2 young children that are kind of middle school age. So Socrates, don't you want to be around to oversee their training and education? And they also appeal to Socrates' own manliness. Basically, his friends say, Socrates, you don't want people to think that you are cowardly or a wimp for at least not trying to escape and just sitting here and let them, you know, carry out the death sentence on you, which was done in ancient Greece by forcing the person either by handing it to them in a situation where they would voluntarily drink it, or forcing it down their throats. But basically, it was a poison made by boiling the bark of a hemlock tree, you know, which was deadly. So that's why we say Socrates drank the hemlock. That's what we mean by the hemlock. So Socrates says, well, I'm not going to make my decision by public opinion. I'm going to make it the way I've always made my decisions as a philosopher, by looking at the arguments for and against. So you, my friends, have given me some arguments why I should accept your offer, but then these are some of the summaries of arguments he uses there, you know. And he imagines the laws coming to him and saying, well, why are you trying to destroy us in the city? And Socrates then says, well, if he does escape, he would overturn the laws of the state because he was sentenced to death. He had a chance, as we said before, to propose exile. He didn't do that. So now, to overturn the sentence of death and escape and go into exile would be overturning the laws of the state and basically trying to nullify the verdict of the whole court system. And he says, if I do that, I would harm the state, because he says any state would be harmed if private citizens at will wanted to overturn the laws. And I mean, you could take a simple example. What if suddenly tomorrow every driver in the city decided, you know what, these red lights, they're a pain having to sit there for one. I'm not going to stop for any more stop signs and red lights, you know. Well, you can imagine just some little simple thing like that would result in chaos, you know. So, so Socrates views the state as almost a person who can be harmed. And so he says there's a moral principle that we shouldn't harm somebody else who's innocent, but he says if I escape, I would harm the state by overturning its laws and nullifying the verdicts of its courts. Therefore, he says I shouldn't escape. He also views the state to be like a parent to him. The laws of the state enabled his parents to get married, have him. He was educated in accordance with the laws. And so he says the state's been like a parent to him, and there's a moral principle that we shouldn't disobey our parents, and also we're not on the same plane as our parents. So he says if I escape, it would be like disobeying a parent. Therefore, if I shouldn't disobey a parent, I shouldn't escape. I'm going over these quickly to point out the main parts. You can read every sentence of them yourself. Also, his third point is that if he escapes, it would be like breaking a contract, an understood agreement. Now, I once worked for a brief time in the mortgage business. When you're signing a mortgage loan, everybody gets around a big table and they're signing 20 pages of documents and passing them around. Well, Socrates doesn't mean that he and officials of the state got together in a formal document signing, and that's how he's got a contract to obey its laws. But he says, look, I understand that I was at liberty to leave Athens at any time. Athens was not East Germany under the Cold War like it was when I grew up, where there were machine gun nests and people and barbed wire, and people could get killed trying to escape from the communist East German side of Berlin to West Berlin. No, I mean, Socrates can leave at any time, but he says, I voluntarily chose to stay in Athens, and he said, if that's the case, then I have an understood agreement to obey its laws. So that's what he's saying there. Now, and those are the highlights so Socrates does stay, allows the sentence to be carried out. Well, we were focusing on Aristotle's claims about moral virtue. He also does talk about intellectual virtues. And, you know, look, I mean, Aristotle is subject to the criticism that he's a bit elitist. I mean, the most virtuous people are the kinds of people who have enough knowledge to investigate things scientifically and intellectually. But he also talks about moral virtue. And if you can get past some of his elitism, I mean, you could say, well, okay, not everybody qualified as virtuous in Aristotle's mind about, you know, who should qualify rationally to be fully virtuous. You know, but if we bring in the fact that we're not living in Athens in 400 BC, we're living here, and you know, we do qualify. We meet a lot of the qualifications. Aristotle was simply wrong about a lot of things, but he was right in a lot of his characterizations about virtues. So he centers around virtue as character traits, and Socrates and Plato also talked about this, but Aristotle gave us a more thorough picture of this, and it's one that has stood the test of time. In other words, there are ethicists today who believe that Aristotle gave us the core of a position on virtue as character traits that is relevant even now. So he does not think that virtues, that people are born virtuous, but he thinks we can acquire these. And he thinks they're acquired over time by practice, that is, by habit. And often we acquire them by, we'll see, using our reason to overcome our natural tendencies that may take us more in the direction what he would call vice. So they're acquired by exercising them, as we saw, and he draws an analogy we saw with other skills. Just as it takes practice over time to acquire a skill at playing an instrument or to become a good builder, so it does with a virtue. And moral virtues he also sees as something that are not developed in isolation. You don't go away and develop, say, courage by going away into a lonely place and meditating on it. But Aristotle's very practical. He says we develop these. By the way, we actually interact with real people in the real world. And, you know, again, as I put on the blackboard, it's like a circular thing. By performing actions that are consistent with the virtue you want to develop, whether it's by choosing to perform courageous deeds to develop courage, or whatever that virtue, you develop the virtue, you develop that character trait, but having developed it, it becomes then easier to act in accordance, in line with that. You know, if you develop self-control, it becomes easier to exercise self-control. If you develop courage, it becomes easier to make courageous choices. So, as I said when discussing this, as it was a question, this model of virtue as the mean between extremes is where Aristotle pushes the envelope. So note, for him, doing too little of something or too much, both of them can be unvirtuous, can be vices. So a virtue is the midpoint between two vices. And so you can see some of these illustrated. We've gone over these before. The virtue of temperance is between totally denying your body's need for food, drink, and even sex, you know, and going overboard, being a glutton. And we saw courage is the mean between having no fear and being foolhardy, or being cowardly and having too much fear and too little courage. So again, he emphasizes the role of the rational part of us to achieve the mean, you know. And I said this is controversial, but people, even down to the present day, look toward our reasoning abilities as what makes us uniquely human. So, in other words, for Aristotle, reason is what singles us out from all other living things on Earth. Plants have only biological functions. They don't have an emotional life. Non-human animals have biological functions and an emotional life, but for Aristotle, reason is something unique to human beings. And it would be things like the ability to understand complex moral concepts, the ability to follow an argument in support of a belief, the ability to form a belief based on reasons. You know, this, he says, is uniquely human. Now, no, since Darwin, you know, the tendency has been to portray human reason as contrasted with the reason of non-human animals as different only in degree from maybe dolphins and border collies and you know, the higher primates. Whereas, again, for Aristotle and even many philosophers today, reason is unique to human beings. So he says this is our function. So excellence, the excellence of a thing, arete, is achieved when a thing performs its main function well. In other words, an excellent knife would be a knife that performs the function of cutting well, because that's its defining function. And so Aristotle says, well, if we are essentially rational beings, then our human excellence is bound up with exercising our reason to gain theoretical knowledge and get the theoretical virtues, but also to control ourselves in our as we conduct our lives from day to day. So, okay, so for him then, it is walking a mean between extreme. So I think I've gone through most of this. And reason for them is, and here's where Aristotle gets in trouble. We already said it. Reason for Aristotle, and also Plato and Socrates, is the most godlike part of us. For Plato, it's the part that should rule. For Plato, people who excel at reason should rule a just state. For Aristotle, reason is what is most human in us, but also most godlike. And this is what gets him into trouble with things like justifying slavery, right? Because he says, well, it's just in the natural order of things that the more rational should rule over the less rational, that we as mortals should be ruled over by the more rational Greek gods. But then he extends that to say, well, that must mean that a more rational people can conquer and enslave a less rational people. And so that gives him, you know, a very bad argument, morally justifying, you know, capturing and enslaving nations. And basically, you know, it was Christianity that overcame some of this. If you look at the history of how slavery was challenged in this country and in England, it was by Protestant revivals, you know, because the Christian view of human beings wasn't this elitist view that's centered on reason as the chief characteristic of our humanness, but on other things, and so, you know, so even though there's a lot that's good in the way Aristotle characterizes virtues, there's also stuff that we can leave in the dustbin of history, you know, like this view that reason is a justification for conquest and enslavement of other peoples, you know, which we today would utterly reject, hopefully. So, okay, remember to bring a number 2 pencil. I'll have some, but the one way to make sure you got a good one is to bring your own. Here's the roll, so if you miss the roll, it's up here. Sign it on the way out, and don't take my pen. And so make sure you have a Scantron form, because I'm going to send you to the bookstore if you don't, and you'll lose time during the test. So pick up one at the bookstore, or better yet, 3. Thanks a lot for coming, and we'll see you Friday. I'm gonna go towards the next next thing we're gonna do on Friday.